In the first part of this video, we will guide you through the process of setting up motion recording in a VivoTech camera and setting VAST to record that video. This first section will cover setting up the motion window in the camera's web interface. Put a check next to Enable Motion Detection. Click New. Then attempt to drag the window to cover the entire motion area. The sensitivity configures the amount of color change required in the picture to activate the motion trigger, while the percentage is the amount of the window or the size of the object that is required to activate the motion trigger. This setup is good for testing purposes in close quarters indoor surveillance, but for a higher megapixel camera, it may not be sensitive enough. In that case, let's use 3 windows to make it more sensitive. These 3 windows work better because the percentage of the window is based on the window size. So a smaller window means a smaller object can activate the motion trigger with the same percentage value. If you wanted to trigger on even smaller objects, you can make the window smaller and place them directly over coverage hotspots. You will need to repeat these steps for each camera you're recording motion with, setting up the motion windows in each camera. When you're finished creating motion windows on the camera end, let's close this window, then bring up VAST Live Client so we may set it for motion recording. You can notice the red boxes in the VAST client showing that the motion window is enabled. Click Configuration, Station Settings, Recording Schedule Settings. Highlight where it says Always. On the right, the drop-down will indicate continuous recording. Change it to Event. If you want, you could also uncheck all the other triggers except motion. We'll click Apply, and then Close. We have now set up both aspects required for motion recording in VAST, the motion window on the camera and the event recordings in VAST. Sometimes it's nice to see the results of the setting changes to confirm it worked. So let's do that now. We'll close this window, then check Playback's recorded video. Click System, launch Playback. Click the plus icons next to the station name, then Cameras, then each camera. In a typical setup, there are multiple recordings listed, indicating different recordings for motion detection. You can also zoom in on the histogram and see the strips of blue and red, indicating red for recorded video and blue for times that aren't recorded. And see the strips of blue and red, indicating red for recorded video and blue for times that aren't recorded. Now for a camera set to continuous recording, we have one time period in the list on the lower right, indicating one continuous recording, along with one solid bar of red surrounded by blue. We have now confirmed our cameras are using the separate recording settings we set for motion and continuous recording. Next, let's take a look at exporting video clips. The executable or exe is the most commonly used option because a video player is embedded into the playback file. This means that no special driver or video playback software needs to be installed to play back the video on another computer. 3GP is also an option for VLC, QuickTime, or Reel 1 Player. And AVI is available for custom codec exports. We'll stick with EXE. The Save To field allows us to change the export location. Below, we can configure the maximum file size, shown here as 1750 megabytes, or we can switch it to a maximum time interval. This function will split up the file into chunks respective to either setting. Now let's export a file using the time slider bar to place the beginning and ending markers. Then we'll click Export EXE to export the file. Based on the settings I changed earlier, it should be located on my desktop. From here I can double-click it to play it back, attach it to an email, or perhaps copy it to USB key for transfer to another physical location.
It's a software program. There's these raw motions in a folder on a timeline, and then you can say, okay, I want this range to this range, and then hit export, and then it creates an exe file with those motions that you selected. Why are there 2 files of the kitchen manager? Oh, because what happened is I know exactly why that happens. There's a timeline in the VAST software, and there's a user that has to select a range. So they saw the range, and then they saw this other motion that was over here, and they clicked on, you can select whatever you want, so even part of a range, and then they export it as an exe file. Then they realized that that motion was actually for the next day. So what they did was they made the 10th have the full motion on it. You know, but it's amazing how that turned into some really big, you know, oh, see, it can be edited. The only option still out there of something possibly happened, the only possible option is that a surveillance motion, like a motion was removed and it never made it onto an exe file. That's it. But that's so unlikely because hotels almost always use the NVR recording system, and you know, you'd have to know exactly where the clip was and everything. It just isn't, it's not very likely happen. If there was motion removed, like actual motion files, then sure, that's possible. So you're asking questions I can't give you an answer to there. I said at the beginning of this, I'll answer questions related to the surveillance and video and things like that. If you ask me why somebody didn't do something, I'm not going to answer your question. Oh, why didn't the security guard watch her on the surveillance bank back there? I don't know. He went upstairs at that exact time. Sorry about that.